button, it goes to that route. And so //Google, you can see that actually passes in a piece of middleware, Passport Authenticate, telling Passport I want to log in by Google, and giving these scopes here. So this is the permission I was talking about earlier. This is the, you're asking for profile and email only. You're not asking for reading Gmail, you're not asking for creating docs, you're not asking for anything like that. All you're asking for is the profile and the email address. So that's great. So what that means is when the browser hits Express with this route, Passport then takes over. And we can see that again if I click on this. Passport's now taking over and issuing a redirect to this extremely long URL which Passport is managing. You then log in as before. And what's happening then is Google is then redirecting to this URL here, or Google callback. And Passport takes over again. So Passport kind of has a second phase here, and it says, this is the part where Passport is doing its kind of secure handshake with Google and saying, the user's now logged in with a temporary, it's given us a temporary token. It then goes server to server and says, right, I've got my client ID and my client secret. Ask Google for an authentication token. So this is quite secure because there's no tokens, there's no secure tokens passed through the browser. It's all server-to-server communication. This is kind of OAuth 2 specs, so sorry. If this is going a bit over your head, don't worry about it. This is how OAuth 2 works. But this, in a nutshell, Passport makes it really easy for you to kind of adhere to this spec. It's then saying that if the authentication was successful, we go to profile page, and if it's a failure, we go back to login. So it's kind of as simple as that, really. I'd certainly, if you are building a Node app and you are looking for authentication, I'd certainly take a look at Passport. It's a really useful tool, and certainly have a think about whether you definitely need username and password authentication, or whether you could just get away with social login. It will obviously save you quite a bit of time, and hopefully save your users a bit of headache as well. Okay, that's it. Yeah, does anybody actually have any questions, or is that totally like...
Yeah, okay, so well, it's a stupid question because I don't know anything about Node. So if I was to not log in and go directly to /profile, do you have to put some kind of Passport thing to block?
That's a really good question. I didn't talk about that, so that's a really good question. So at the top of the Express routing file, we have an ensure authenticated function. So the way that Express works, for any of you that aren't aware, Express works through a concept of middleware, and so you define a route. So say this route here is /login. You then pass in a bunch of functions in a kind of a chain, and they're called middleware. And each piece of middleware is executed one after the other, unless one of your middleware says, stop now, I don't want you to continue any further. And so if you look at logging, we've only got one piece of middleware, and this is rendering a login page, very, very simple. But for profile down here, we have two bits of middleware. The first one is the ensure authenticated function. So what ensure authenticated does is it checks if you are authenticated. This is a Passport kind of function that Passport adds something to the Express request object. So it's basically saying, is this user authenticated? If it is, then we call this next argument that's passed in, which is a function. So that's basically saying, cool, we're authenticated, go on to the next piece in the middleware. If we're not authenticated, then we redirect to the login page. And so that will stop the middleware chain at that point, and it won't continue on to this, which is the next piece of middleware. So if we show authenticated calls next, then we continue on to this next piece of middleware, which renders a profile page. So that's kind of how it works. So actually, the only Passport-specific thing here is this request is authenticated. Everything else is kind of standard Express routing. Yeah. Cool.
I know the Ruby equivalents, like OmniAuth, may have kind of users submitted providers. Is that the same with Passport, or did Passport create everything?
So the module-based system allows obviously other developers to build modules as is. The core ones are built by the Passport dude who built Passport. So Google, Facebook, Twitter. His name, Passport dude. Jared, something or other. But yeah, a lot of the other ones. So like, if we look at the number of strategies that are out there, because there's 307 strategies, a lot of these are, they're built by other people. So let's say, for example, FreshBooks is a service that we've recently integrated with. FreshBooks is built by Michael J. Cole. Yeah. And the plugin architecture is really, really nice, actually. I've built one or two of these modules as well. It's really, really simple to get going. All you really need is the URL of the authentication server, so like freshbooks.com/OAuth/something else. And then if there's anything particular about the OAuth implementation, that's something I should have mentioned as well. OAuth 2 is supposed to be a standard, but all the different providers do so many different things. And you could just do this yourself. You could use the Node OAuth library, which is actually what Passport uses under the hood. And you could do it all yourself, but Passport takes care of all of these little annoying gotchas. So FreshBooks, for example, might have a slightly different way of requesting a refresh token, which is part of the OAuth 2 spec. Passport just takes care of that under the hood, so that's really nice.
Yeah, the question was basically, so is Passport pure code or is it a service?
It is pure code, and it's something that you deploy yourself. Yeah, so it's a Node library essentially, and it is something that you would integrate into your app.
Where's the ID that Google gives you for your app?
Yeah,
Where
okay.
are you storing that?
So the ID, let's see if I've got it here. So Google has a console essentially, and if I go home, so I've created a Passport tutorial app in their console, and there's a whole load of crap in here that I'm sure is very useful to a lot of people, but I have no idea what most of it does. The interesting bits for me are credentials. Sorry if this is a bit small. So what you essentially do is you say, set up an app called Passport tutorial, and then add some credentials, an OAuth 2 client ID. You select web application, because that's what it is. You then need to add in a couple of authorized URIs. So OAuth is it's quite secure, and there's a lot of hoops that you need to jump through because of the nature of what you're doing. You're authenticating with users' details, and so it kind of has to be quite secure.
Every time you're using it, you're having to supply that data to Google every time you're authenticating. But that can't be stored in your web page, can it?
Yep, good question. Okay, so if we go back to the Passport configuration file, the client ID and the client secret are part of the environment. They're actually on the environment variable, Google ID and Google secret. So yes, you could just type in your client ID here, and that would be in your source code. But what's a much better idea is to put that in an environment variable. And locally, I've got a .env file here. This is the client ID and the secret for this particular app. What you would tend to do in production is you'd still deploy this, and you would stick in your environments. If you're using Heroku, you'd set a config with these two bits of information. And so you're not. I don't know if this. Sorry, I don't know if this is the original question, but
it's
okay,
kind of,
it is. Yeah. So you're not committing the client ID, and particularly the client secret, to source control. They are in the environment. It's part of what's called the 12-factor process for building apps, which is really interesting in itself. A completely different talk, actually. But one part of that is keeping all of your configuration in your environment and not committing it into your source code, to source control. Yeah.
How can you keep that kind of secret and still use it?
So this is
It's on the server.
Yeah, server
It's
side.
Yeah. So I've got a diagram. Sorry, I'm running over a bit, so I will stop in a second. But there's a diagram. I'll post a link to the code here, which is just a GitHub repo. There's a diagram here that kind of explains the flow of things. And so essentially, you've got three parts of the puzzle. You've got the user with his or her browser. You've got your app server, which is handily called client in OAuth 2 terminology, and you've got the Google server, which is the server. So OAuth 2 is, and OAuth in general, there's a lot of terminology. It looks really, really confusing. The first time I looked at it, I was like, I have no idea what's going on here. It's actually really straightforward. It's really simple. It's just a whole load of jargon there to try and throw you off for some unknown reason. So anyway, I created this little diagram just to try and give an idea about what actually happens at which point, more than anything, just to remind myself what happens really, to be honest with you. But you notice that the first few bits of information, the first few flows are between the user and your app server. It then goes on